In this video, we are talking about 15 things you need to know before you move to Vancouver, Washington, so stay tuned. I absolutely love making this content because a few years ago, when I was thinking about relocating, there were no resources available for me and I didn't have any friends or family living in the area. And if I had these videos, it would have helped me a lot. So I hope you're enjoying them. Make sure to give them a like. Even if they help you out a little bit, it would absolutely make my day. And as always, you know, like, share, subscribe if you know anyone who could benefit from this information. If you've watched any of my videos before, you know I absolutely love working with people who are considering relocating, whether they want to buy, sell, invest, or rent. I'm super happy to be that resource and concierge for you. So make sure you text me right now at 360-818-4438 so we can get you started on your journey up here to Vancouver, Washington. With that said, let's jump in. Number one is confusion on where Vancouver is. If you move here, people will inevitably wonder, are you moving to Canada? When you say Washington, is it Washington, D.C.? And I actually put out a poll on my personal Facebook before making this video and asked some of my local friends, what is something that people need to know? And by and large, one of the biggest things that people felt you should know is that people will be confused on where you live. My favorite comment that I got was Vancouver, not BC, in Washington, not DC, near Portland, not Maine, in Clark County, not Las Vegas. Forget it. So that gives you an idea of just a little petty frustration that people have in living in Vancouver. Fun fact, actually, Vancouver, Washington existed before Vancouver, BC. So we are the OG Vancouverans, okay? And my mother-in-law still refers to Vancouver as Vancouver, Washington, USA. Every time she says it when she visits, when she's on the phone. Love you, Ma, but it's just my husband and I get a kick out of every time that she says it. Vancouver, Washington, USA. Number two, everything that you need is here. So one of the best things about living in Vancouver is the proximity to Portland, but if you don't want to go into Portland, you absolutely don't have to. Sometimes when I speak to friends and I ask them if they ever go into Portland, a very common response is, oh no, I never go into Portland. Or there's a good chunk of people who actually avoid going into Portland completely. And the only reason you would ever need to go into Portland is if you want to fly out. And I guess if you hated Portland that much, you could fly out to Seattle, but that's a 3-hour drive, so it's up to you. But it has the added advantage of, yes, everything you need is here. You don't have to leave, but Portland has a whole other range of offerings in terms of restaurants and culture and events that you can take advantage of. So it really is the best of both worlds. You can easily zip in to Portland and take advantage of the big city, or you can completely avoid the big city if you hate big cities. So definitely gives you some options, but everything you need is here in Vancouver. Number three is kind of pronunciations and nicknames. There are some interesting pronunciations of towns and streets here in the Portland metro area in Southwest Washington, and it's pretty obvious if you mispronounce them. So a common one, and one that I made when I moved here, was saying Camas, which is a city just to the east of Vancouver. It's Camas. Your GPS will steer you wrong. I still get a little chuckle every time we're headed into Camas. Couch Street, for instance, spelled couch, pronounced cooch. It's Willamette, not Willamette. There's a lot of little ones. Tigard. When we first moved here, I said Tigard when we were actually in the city, and someone was like, oh, you must be new. So the way you pronounce things will make you stick out a little bit as a newbie. So those are some little tips for you. Also, in terms of nicknames, you'll hear people say, oh, Vancouver is called the Couve. No one really refers to it that way in everyday speaking. It's kind of referred to in a joking manner, like, oh, when's your family gonna visit the Couve? And there's some events that have that name. For instance, Dine the Couve, which is a dining event in Vancouver. So you'll hear it referenced in some event titles, but in everyday speaking, people don't really call it the Couve. Sometimes people refer to it as Vantucky, which is more of a Portlander thing. People who live here don't refer to it that way, but if you're not familiar with it, or if you grew up in the Portland metro area, I find people call it that because there was the perception that Vancouver was kind of like Hicksville and very country. Get it? Vantucky, Kentucky. Very country compared to the city of Portland. So people don't actively call it that, more so in a joking way, but it's good to know. So that was number 3. Number 4 is the feel to me. And my lovely husband described this really well. He said that Vancouver feels like the straight A sibling to the free-spirited wild child of the city of Portland. It's a great metaphor for kind of the feel that Vancouver has. It has a suburban feel, even though based on our growth, we are the 4th largest city in the state of Washington. We're one of the fastest growing areas in Washington. And I think a friend told me recently that per like the dictionary definition, we are technically no longer suburban, but actually moving into the urban space, I guess you can say. But it feels suburban to me as someone who grew up in the suburbs. Number 5 is the Cascadia Subduction Zone. And if you've never heard of that before, you're like, what is that? Now, as someone who grew up in California, earthquakes were relatively familiar to me. I experienced dozens of them growing up and didn't live that far from the San Andreas Fault. So earthquakes for me personally weren't a big deal. But if you are moving from somewhere where earthquakes are not common, I thought this was worth mentioning that the entire Portland metro area, Seattle, pretty much the whole Pacific Northwest sits on the Cascadia Subduction Zone, which is an earthquake zone. I've experienced less earthquakes in the 3 years that I've lived here than I did in the prior 3 years of, my last 3 years in California. But it's a once in a 300-year event, and you can look it up and do your research on it. So I'll link to a video and learn more about it in the description. And it's not something to be incredibly scared of. It's just a different way of prepping for a natural disaster. So there's earthquake preparedness, no different than if you live in Florida, you have hurricane preparedness. And personally, I would take earthquakes over hurricanes any day. I've never had to evacuate my house on a yearly basis because of earthquakes. But I do know that that's something that our friends in Florida deal with. So just something to keep in mind in terms of being prepared and choosing, what area you want to live in, whether that's elevation or being around people, meaning more compact concrete jungle type areas or more rural, being out on your own land, self-sufficiency things to consider. So I would look into that. And then, basic earthquake preparedness, which I can get you more resources for as well. So that's one thing that I would have liked to know before moving here, and something that I didn't know, which is kind of funny coming from a very earthquake prone place. Didn't even register or cross my mind to look into that. But people know about it here. It's not a big fear or something that's commonly talked about, but if you ask people about it, they are aware of it, that, every few hundred years there's an earthquake. Could never happen in our lifetime, could happen today or tomorrow. We just don't know, right? Number 6 is homelessness in the city of Vancouver. And if you watch the news, especially post-2020, there's been a lot of portrayal of Portland as this city that's on fire and you can set up a tent anywhere. There are a lot of houseless people in the Portland area. There's tents, a lot of places. You definitely see it. If you drive around Portland for, 10, 20 minutes, you will see some of that. It's not as bad in Vancouver as it is in Portland, but we do have a sizable houseless population that typically congregate in the downtown Vancouver area. So that's something to keep in mind. If that's a passion of yours to get involved with, there's, definitely opportunities to get involved and help, but that may be something that you haven't experienced depending on where you're coming from. Number 7 is politics. Politics has become more talked about and on the forefront of our lives in the past 5 years or so. And I think it's worth noting that Vancouver is a very purple area. We are very mixed in terms of political leanings. You have everything from conservatives to communists. I would say that our political leanings are split down the middle in terms of the city. So if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're independent, or anywhere in between, more right, more left, or falling somewhere in the middle, I would say that this is a politically friendly environment for you compared to what most people think about Portland, which is very progressive. Some of my conservative and more right-leaning friends may not want to live in the city of Portland due to politics, where I feel like Vancouver is a lot more, we'll say, balanced. Number 8 is the size. The city of Vancouver, and when I say the city of Vancouver, I mean Vancouver proper. If you look at the actual city limits, it's smaller than you think. And when you're looking for houses, whether to buy or rent, when you move here, you might see areas like Hazeldale and Minnehaha. My husband Jared always, when we say Minnehaha, goes haha at the end. So areas like Hazeldale and Minnehaha have Vancouver addresses, though they're not within the city limits of Vancouver. So that's something to keep in mind if for whatever reason you want to be actually within the city limits of Vancouver. I'll link in the description to a tool that you can use to find out whether you'll live in the city of Vancouver. So all those other areas like Orchards, Minnehaha, Hazeldale, Salmon Creek fall within actually the unincorporated area of Clark County. So something to note, if you want to be set up on a search, if you're looking for a particular school system or school district, if you want your kids to be in a particular high school or elementary school, I can set you up on a search that's only going to show you houses within the boundaries of that school. So keep that in mind. Make sure to call, email, DM me, however you want to get a hold of me. I can set you up on that search. So some of the factors that might influence whether you want to be in the city or outside of the city might be different programs that are offered, might be a tax situation in terms of property taxes. So it could possibly offer you some advantages depending on your situation, but contact me if you want to discuss that further for your unique situation. That brings us to number 9, which is the weather and seasons. As you can see kind of in the background, we just had our snowpocalypse event of 2021. We got about 6 to 12 inches of snow depending on where in the city you were. Not very common. Most people will just stay indoors. The snow started Thursday night and we had snow on the ground Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and yesterday. Starting to thaw out today, which is Tuesday. We have very mild winters, so most people, when we do get a little bit of snow, if it does stick, don't leave the house. But if you want snow, you can head up to Mount Hood, and if you want to avoid snow, Vancouver is a great place. On average, we get about 3 inches a year or so, and typically it doesn't stick. This is the longest we've had snow stick since I've lived here in my 3 years, which you already know. And I bring up mild winters because, and the rain in general, watch one of my past videos where I talk more extensively about the weather and the amount of rain we get, which is less than you think. One of my neighbors put it perfectly. He said that we put in our time with the rain and our mild winters. Again, nothing like, some of the snowier states in the Union. And we get rewarded with 4 months of absolutely gorgeous, beautiful weather. Because we're so far north, it doesn't really get dark until after 9:30 in the summer. So sometimes it'll be 9:45 and it'll be dusk. The sunset, but there's still light outside. So there's a lot of advantages to that in the summer in terms of activities and events. Be careful, because I find that I typically eat dinner a lot later in the summer because it's light out for so late. Sunset might be at 9 o'clock, and that's a little confusing for the rhythm of my day. But the summers are absolutely gorgeous. Best summers. If you've ever been to San Diego, I would say that our summers are comparable to San Diego weather, which is widely known to have perfect weather. That brings me to number 10, which is our proximity to beaches and mountains and all sorts of activities that you want to do. Whether that's sands, riding in dunes and stuff like that, or if you want to go to the mountains and go skiing, from where I'm sitting right now in Vancouver to get up to Mount Hood is about an hour, 15 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on where exactly you're going in Mount Hood. And then if you want to get to the beach, that's also about an hour and a half. So either direction, go east for snow, an hour and a half, or go west to get to the coast in an hour and a half as well. We are also 3 hours south of Seattle and Mount Rainier, which is one of the snowiest places in the entire country. So my husband loves snow, is obsessed with it. So he loves the fact that we have proximity, whether it's Mount Hood or Mount Rainier, or if you want to go a little further out, you can go to Baker. But there's a lot of options if you love snow, and there's a lot of options if you absolutely want to avoid it. Number 11, nobody swims in the Columbia. And this was a little bit of a surprise to me because I guess when I think of a river, I don't always think of something that you can't swim in. But between the current and the traffic with the commercial boats, nobody really swims in it. There is a beach area off, like just east of downtown Vancouver. You could walk there from the main downtown area where people will get in the water. People will kind of wade in the water from the shore, but in terms of like swimming across it or training in it, if you're like training for a triathlon, it's not really something that people do, and it's actually not safe. So that's something important to know. There's plenty of boating activities. You can use Sea-Doos, you can kayak, and you can do all sorts of stuff. But swimming in it, not so much. Number 12 is that Vancouver is not very walkable. The most walkable area in Vancouver is going to be downtown. So if you live in downtown, you can do a lot of walking. But there's also not a grocery store in downtown Vancouver at the moment. So in order to get groceries, you would have to, realistically, you would have to bike. I mean, it's a pretty far walk to the grocery store if you live in downtown Vancouver. So you'd probably have to bike or do ride share or use a car. It's not very walkable, but it is bike friendly. So if you want to get around, you'll probably need a car. But it is great for bikes too. There's lots of bike lanes. You can actually bike to Portland from either bridge. So you can take the Eastern I-205 bridge and you can bike across that. You can't walk across that. And then on the west side, you can bike and walk across the I-5 bridge into Portland. So just something to know, having a car is very useful. You can get by without it, but it's still not walkable. You're gonna need some other form of transportation, whether that's rideshare, public transit, or a bike. Number 13 is taxes. If you've watched any of my other videos, you've heard me talk about taxes. We live in an income tax free. We live in a no income tax state. However, if you work in Oregon and live in Washington, you will be paying Oregon income taxes. You'll have to file state taxes as a non-resident. So the best thing you can do if you want to take advantage of no income tax is to work in Washington or have a remote work situation. Which you can still do for Oregon companies, but that's something obviously you want to talk to your employer about or get on the job search to find remote work. If not paying income tax is important to you, if that's a consideration for you when it comes to living in Washington and Southwest Washington. That brings me to number 14, which is commuting. About 30 to 40% of people who live in Clark County work out of state. And by out of state, that typically means in Oregon. So there are more jobs available in Portland and in Oregon. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. The commuting is not necessarily an ideal situation. You'll hear me talk a lot in my videos about how we have easy access to Portland, but during those commuting hours, it can take quite a bit of time to get into the city. And again, that depends on where in Vancouver you live. Do you live on the east side? Do you live on the west side? Do you live in the south part or the north part? Do you live outside of the city limits? Because everything outside of the city limits when it comes to going into Oregon is going to be north or more east of Vancouver. And number 15 in the list of things that you need to know before moving to Vancouver, Washington is that people don't want you to move here. And that can seem a little off-putting, but stay with me. In general, in terms of an abstract concept, people who live in the Portland metro area, so we're talking about Greater Portland, we're talking about Southwest Washington, don't want you to move here. native people here are concerned about overcrowding. So you'll see negative comments like Vancouver's not great, or you don't want to move here. You'll definitely see that kind of sentiment and comments. And a lot of it is just protecting what they love. People are afraid that when more people move here, it's going to change. And people really, for the most part, do love the way that it is. Of course, we want to see things improve in different areas. I think everyone wants, the best for the city and state that they live in. So there's always room for improvement. But by and large, people love living here, and they're afraid if there's a big influx of people that it will change. So you'll see comments on different YouTube videos and on Facebook about either just what we need, more people moving here, or don't move here, it sucks, or different things like that. So don't be off-put by it. And just know that even though in the abstract, in like a very macro level, people don't want you to move here, people are extremely friendly. And once you're here, you'll have no problem meeting people and making friends. People are very friendly. So I hope that makes sense. I find that living in the Pacific Northwest is it's a little slice of heaven, and people get really protective of it. There's stuff here that you won't find anywhere else in the country, or the world for that matter. And so people are definitely protective of it, but they are extremely friendly. So when you're here as an individual, they will like you and accept you, and you won't feel any of the negativity that you might see online in general as people are trying to dissuade people from moving here, which is why I think that myth about the weather has been perpetuated, because as you can see from my videos, is it rainy and gloomy and awful every single time that I'm filming? No, the sun's poking out right now, but we just had snow. And wait till we get to the summer and you see some of the amazing beauty. I mean, it's beautiful in the fall, it's beautiful in the winter, in the spring, in the summer. It's beautiful year-round. It's truly an amazing place to live. I absolutely love it, which is why I love making these videos. So if you're thinking about relocating to or within Southwest Washington, give me a call. If you need a referral to a real estate professional anywhere in the country, please reach out to me. I have a vast network of amazing agents that I'd love to put you in touch with. And if you're exploring real estate as a career, get in touch with me. I can help you get started. I would absolutely love to be your guide in that way as well. So I hope this was helpful in terms of understanding some of the things that are either just good to know, some of them I hope were a little funny and you found entertaining, and other things that are a little bit more serious that you need to know. I'll link all of the references in the description below, so make sure to check that out. Subscribe, like, share this with a friend or your spouse who might be considering relocating. I look forward to welcoming you as a neighbor here in Southwest Washington. Here's to you finding home with Hal. Till next time, bye.